So now as we kind of transition over to what your current like training, then we'll kind of get into the strength coaching things. But so you did some powerlifting. Can you kind of walk us through what you did? And of course everyone out there is gonna want to know totals. But
Yeah,
no, just a
so
little more like what you did, where you competed and how that experience was for you.
so I started off in powerlifting. I was a fan of the sport as a football player. Um, you know, Watching Mark Bell and his YouTube channel and listening to his podcast and being fans of Stan Efferding, Dan Green, a lot of
Yeah.
those powerlifters who were big in the 2010s. Um, I knew I wanted to go into powerlifting, and I did. And I'm 6'7". I'm not necessarily the the stereotypical build of a powerlifter. Um, I did my first powerlifting meet shortly after I graduated. Um, Absolutely fell in love with it. I've actually only done two powerlifting meets. The last one I did was back in 2017. So my current existing total is absolutely nothing to be impressed by. Because right after that, I transitioned into strongman because when I took the job back at UNC, um, there's an amazing strongman gym here in Raleigh called
Nice.
Spider Strength. And the reason I didn't get into strongman in the first place was just, I mean, very few gyms have strongman equipment. You don't
Right.
find many places that have logs, Atlas stones, all that stuff. And I knew I needed someone to teach me how to do it all. So when we moved here and I heard about this strongman gym and saw some of the freaks that were training there, and it's owned by a former America's Strongest Man, um, a really good competitor himself. I went, checked it out, met the guys, jumped into a training session, and I was hooked.
Yeah.
I'm much more built for it. Um, so I fell in love with strongman and started competing. And right as I was getting ready to go for my pro card, the whole world shut down with COVID.
Oh,
So all the competitions were canceled, um, and I have yet to compete since then because during the whole pandemic process, I sustained a pretty severe disc injury, resulting in severe nerve impingement, and I basically lost function in my right leg. So for almost a year there, I was basically dragging this right leg around. Um, a non-functional calf, semi-functional hamstring and glute, and it was an incredibly frustrating process. I thought that was the end for me as far as a competitor myself. Um, but 2.5 years of rehab later, I've finally nursed this thing back to health, got a ton of nerve function back, and I've finally surpassed all my pre-injury strength. So
nice.
gearing up to compete again here at the end of January, which will qualify me for nationals. Then I just got to go and take care of business there and get that pro card.
Nice. So yeah, one of the things I'm sure a lot of people don't know, and I know a little bit about it. Was a state level strongman competitor here. Did it for about a year, so by no means anywhere near your level. So I have a general understanding. I was really fortunate. Some guys that were competing at a pretty high level kind of helped put together a program for me. So I'm just curious, and I'm sure people out there are too. Can you walk us through like what a week looks like, and then maybe like a training block, if like, for this many weeks we usually generally do this. I mean, I know there's a lot of customization there, but can you kind of just give a brief, like an overview of that?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about strongman compared to powerlifting is every strongman competition, the events are going to be different.
Yep.
Typically, there's going to be 5 events, and every competition is going to be a different combination of 5 events. And there's a million different variations of every event. I mean, sometimes you'll be lifting max weight for a single, sometimes it's max reps in 60 seconds. There's moving events. There's a million different deadlift variations you might have to do. So setting up training for strongman is always going to be based around what are the 5 events, and there's going to be certain competitions that lean more towards pure static strength. A lot of max weight type events, and the training for that is going to look different than certain competitions which lean more towards max rep type events or a lot of moving events. So depending on if it's a heavier competition or a lighter competition, will really kind of dictate what training looks like there. My biggest thing for strongman is you have to be well-rounded. You've got to be a generally strong human. You've got to be in good shape. You've got to have excellent work capacity, and you can't have a weakness in strongman. In powerlifting, you've got your squat specialists, your bench specialists, your deadlift specialists, and they only have three things they need to focus on. They need to be good at squatting, benching, deadlifting. They just have to do it for a single on meet day.
Right.
Strongman, you got to be able to do it all. So there's always going to be, I'm always going to be focusing on a foundation of GPP. Just general work capacity, conditioning is going to be huge for strongman competitors. Um, developing an overhead press, developing deadlift. Both of those are going to be huge. I tend not to do a whole lot of back squatting with strongman competitors. I'll typically lean on a front squat. Um,
Does that
so
kind of
most of my
help with the? Does that help that movement help more with like things like the Atlas Stone and some of the other
so much
just
of
the
strongman
stability?
is so much of strongman is anteriorly loaded. So whether
Yeah.
it's an Atlas stone out in front, whether it's a log that's out in front, whether it's a
Yeah.
sandbag carry, a zercher, whatever, so much of strongman is anterior load. So front squat has a ton of transfer, and then the other thing, just about every strongman event is going to be incredibly taxing on your lower back.
Hmm.
So when you're looking at setting up your training, a lot of your training is going to have to be lower back taxing. You don't want to add on other things that are additionally lower back taxing, like a back squat, for
Right.
example. So when you're setting up your training, you really have to look at the 5 events and say, okay, how can I train all 5 of these events while not destroying my body, right?
Right.
So a lot of times I'll kind of have an A week and a B week where I'll train certain events heavy and the other events light, and then the next week I flip it. The other events
Nice.
I train heavy, the other events I train light. If it's a moving event, for example, on one week I'll do heavy load, short distance. On the following week, lightweight, longer distances, or lighter weight, really focusing on foot speed. Typically, every session, I'll have one or two of the events that I'm touching on in the session, and then complementary barbell exercises. So, if it's a session where I'm doing Atlas stones, I'm probably going to be front squatting in that session. The front squat is going to be a complementary lift for an Atlas stone. It's going to prime me up for the Atlas stone, working with similar muscle groups. So whatever event I'm touching on that day, I'm gonna choose a few main, traditional lifts to go with it that are gonna help strengthen that movement. Typically with the event work, you're not necessarily building strength when you're doing the event work itself. The event work is really practice more than anything. It's more the barbell lifts, the accessory work that you're building that general strength to transfer over to the events themselves. So,
Would
you
you?
know,
I was gonna.
good.
And would you still do like the traditional movements, say on a day, and then also do um Atlas Stone at the end of it? Like finish the training with the implement.
Yeah, so usually I'll do the at least some of the barbell work first. I like doing some of the event work when I'm already a little bit pre-fatigued, because on competition day, outside of event number one, all four of the other events, you're going to be somewhat fatigued for them. So I like being A, warmed up from the barbell lifting, and then B, forced to train in a little bit of a state of fatigue when I'm touching on the event work.
Got it. Yeah, just to show everybody out there, just kind of here's this an image. I was typing for a minute while you were talking. I was trying to find some good images of you, but I failed miserably. So just a couple images of kind of Atlas Stone, and we was talking about that anterior load and just kind of that beginning phase of lifting it, and just kind of that like that partial phase. It brings back memories. But
Yeah,
great,
a lot of
great
these a
movement.
lot of these strongman events, they look kind of awkward, barbaric, like there's not a whole lot of technique involved, like you just pick up the heavy rock. But when I first got into the sport, I was shocked at how much technique goes to each and every
Yep.
event. I was a fantastic deadlifter, so I thought, oh, picking up the Atlas stones, that's gonna be my thing. The second I touched an Atlas stone, I was like, oh my God. This is something totally
You're
different.
absolutely right, because like I remember the positioning, and then use the tacky in your hands and
Yeah,
your forearms, like how you get them just right on the rock or the stone, determine like some of the larger ones I could do down the road. I would do easier than the lighter ones, because my technique, just my brain must have kicked in like, okay, this is hard. Like we need to get the right leverage, and as you're mentioning, like that slow roll back to get it in between your legs, and then kind of
yeah.
shimmy it up. It's
And
yeah,
those
it's
the wider diameter stones, you get more surface area to kind of bear hug it.
yep,
So the smaller stones are a huge pain in the ass to lift
yeah.
because you're awkwardly trying to, hug it. But the wider the surface area, you get a little better grip on it, but obviously heavier.
So now you mentioned this. So there's generally 5 events that you're training for. It sounds like, is that like a 5 day a week rotation? Do you go every other day? Is it 5 days straight? Like what does that look like for you?
So I've done it multiple different ways, and I hate to keep giving borderline non-answers,
No,
the
no,
old
it's good.
depends answer. But if it's depending on how heavy the competition is, how lower back taxing it is, I mean, I've trained as little as 3 days a week for it because that's literally
Uh,
all I could recover from. And then I've trained up to 5 days a week. If there's an event that is not overly taxing, but also has a high level of skill demand, like a circus dumbbell, for example,
right.
um, that's something that I'll train twice a week
Got
just
it.
to continue to get the practice. It's not incurring too much of a recovery deficit. So if it's a lighter competition, more of a rep or moving based competition, or there's just an event where I really need to continue to hammer the skill, I'll train more frequently. If it's just a brutal, heavy, max overhead press, max deadlift, heavy yoke type competition, I might be looking at training 3 days a week. Um, and just step number one, look at the events, say, how can I train these while still mitigating fatigue and allowing myself to recover? And looking at training frequency is one of those first steps.
And now, so that for the meets, I know in the past, or the events, the competitions, all 5. I know one of the ones I went to, I think they only told us 4 or 3 or something, but again, it was a smaller contest. Do you always know which events you're going to do?
Typically, they release the events and the weights a few months in advance.
Yeah,
For sometimes there's a mystery event type
right.
thing. With some of the bigger, world's strongest man type competitions, they'll keep a lot of those events under wraps until right at the very end of things. But for the most part, at the amateur level, they release all the events a few months in advance, so you can prepare.
Got it. Yeah, and it seems to me too like there's a really good dynamic. People think just big, strong guys, but like the conditioning as well as the strength. Because when I was doing it, a friend of mine, competed at a fairly high level. He won a couple states, and did well at nationals. Not the level you were at, but or are at, but he was up there. And a big thing that he used to say separated him is they were all just as strong. Maybe some guys even a little stronger than him, but he has had great conditioning to where he would, he could just, if it was any of the carrying events or the sprint in between and grab the wagon, then you got to pull the chain and do the, any of those type of relay type events, he just always just crushed it. He would win those all the time. And, it's interesting. So is there anything you do for cardio, or is it just kind of, using the implements, like interval style? How do you work on your, endurance or ability to kind of last through those longer
Yeah,
time
so
limits?
most of my conditioning work is done within training, and I like using some strongman implements for my conditioning, whether that a lot of what I do will be either some sort of a carry, whether that's a sandbag carry or a yoke carry, and I'm doing runs, every minute on the minute. For example, it might be sandbag carry for a set distance, set it down, start the clock, and then you're starting rep number two right when you hit 60 seconds and doing, 15 rounds of that. Um, if it's a max reps in 60-second event that I'm prepared for, um, we'll have a set weight that gets released. For example, if it's a log clean and press, max reps in 60 seconds, it'll be a set weight for every competitor, and that weight is released. So it might be, 300 pounds. So I'll start the training cycle, with lighter weight, really trying to hit significantly more reps than I'm probably going to at that 300-pound weight in competition, just building that base of conditioning specific to that event, and tapering that down a little bit as I get closer and closer. But most of the conditioning work is handled within training, strongman style.
Got it. Yeah, and just kind of showing us a little bit, just showing a few different positions here for people who maybe haven't, just trying to, as far as like the log that you're talking about, right?
Yep,
Is this pretty familiar to kind of some of the
that's it.
movements? Yep. And usually, and if I remember correctly, and it's a mixture, right, of like total weight, and then some events will be reps. I know one I did was reps. Is that kind of like, hey, here's the weight, and how many reps can you get?
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, it's interesting, interesting stuff. Um, no, good stuff. I appreciate that. I do, so we talked a lot about training, a couple other components there. I know one of the things that I struggled with, and I can imagine it's tenfold at your level, was injury. From just kind of not doing the maintenance work. So, and then the second thing was just caloric intake and nutrition. So I know, we were talking before, you worked with Justin Harris from Troponin Nutrition and First Detachment. He did, that's kind of how you and I met.
Yep.
Um, he worked a little bit with nutrition. Obviously, you have a ton of knowledge on the topic as well. So curious to, like, what is your overview, as far as nutrition goes currently for your training specifically? What does that look like? Pre, post, during workout, throughout the week? Just kind of give us an overview of that.
Yeah, so I view the nutrition for strongman and powerlifting equally, if not more important than the training. I mean, you look at the elite strongman competitors, 350 to 450 pounds body weight
Yeah.
on average, and that's a lot of muscle those guys are carrying.
Right.
Some, they're not in bodybuilding shape by any means, but those guys are carrying a ton of muscle. And I quickly realized early in my career how important the nutrition was for physically developing to where I needed to be to have any shot of being competitive. And I kind of stumbled into it a little bit by accident. Um, when I first got into powerlifting, I just did the classic dirty bulk, gained 50 pounds over the course of a few months, went from about 310 up to 360, and saw some great gains initially. Bench went up, squat went up, got to a point where I literally couldn't deadlift from the floor because my midsection had gotten so big. And but
That's when you
then
go. That's when you go sumo, though, right?
yeah, yeah, I did. Literally, that's what I did. Um, but I quickly got to a point where progress in training halted and started declining. I felt awful, absolutely no conditioning. Health was taking a turn for the worse. Just constantly in a state of misery. Um, so at that point, I dieted myself down. I was decently well versed on nutrition, was doing all the research that I could, and I dieted myself down, probably way over dieted. I got down to, 270, 275. So
Wow.
lost a ton of strength in the process, but I got leaner than I'd ever been before. I had abs for the first time in my life, and I really kind of fell in love with the process of just, eating 6 meals a day, prepping, seeing weekly physique changes, and seeing vascularity starting to form. And, I kind of fell in love with the process. And then, after I finished dieting, I really stayed locked in on nutrition, got my calories back up, and then suddenly all my strength started coming back. My body kind of got used to its new leverages. And next thing I knew, after a few months, I had regained all the strength that I lost, and I was equally as strong as I was at 360. But now I was about 285 pounds with abs
Yeah.
and had that same strength, but it was in exponentially better shape, way better condition. Had great motivation and energy and training. I was light on my feet. So I quickly realized, okay, being strong is not just about eating everything in sight and getting as big as possible. there's a lot to this when it comes to just developing a physique. I mean, I started looking at the bodybuilders, and everyone thinks the bodybuilders are soft with training, or the Smith machine, this and that. But you look at these bodybuilders, they are incredibly strong. Whether it was Ronnie and Dorian Yates, or just, some of the guys today, Nick Walker, Ian Valier, guys like that. I mean, these guys are moving incredible weight with incredible control for sets of 8, 10, 12, 15. Um, and muscle mass is what moves weight.
Right.
Um, so I quickly realized how important the nutrition was. And, eventually I realized that I want to work with a coach. I don't want to work with a bodybuilding coach. It's the bodybuilders who know how to develop a physique, know how to put muscle on humans better than anyone else in this field. Um, and I'd been a fan of Justin Harris for a few years actually. Just seeing YouTube videos of him when he was, working with Dave Tate, and was doing, writing a lot of articles for Elite FTS. So,
Yeah.
I was well aware of Justin years before I ever reached out to him. Um, but I got to a certain point where I'd gotten big again, much leaner, but I was big. I just competed in a strongman competition. I was back up to about 340, 350, and I knew it was time to diet again. I was like, I want to work with a coach this time. So I reached out to Justin. Um, he took me on, and that's when I really kind of started learning about how to weaponize nutrition and apply it to strength athletes. Justin dieted me down. We did it right. We dieted slow and patient. Um, and then from there, at the end of the diet, we rebounded. I put on more muscle mass than I'd ever put on in any one given period of time in my life. Suddenly, my numbers in the gym were just skyrocketing. I was hitting lifetime PRs across the board. And short after that, that's when I was really knocking on the door of my pro card.
Yeah.
Um, so I see, like I said, nutrition is being equally, if not more important than the training itself. If you want to be a strength athlete, you've got to put muscle on. And, I see a lot of lifters out there who go through these quote unquote hypertrophy blocks because they do sets of 8 for a few weeks. Like, no, if you want to really be serious about hypertrophy, you got to eat like a bodybuilder, you know.
Right.
And, so
Well, I want
now,
if I c sorry, I was gonna jump in on that just before we get too far away from the process. Just for
sure.
those who might maybe don't know out there, can you walk through, like, how long when you're working with Justin, how long did you diet down for? Like, how long was that, uh, process?
We probably dieted down for about 16 weeks. I would say
Yeah.
was the
So
duration.
4 months, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people sometimes think of a diet, especially if they're not in like a physique sport, they think of a diet as like a month or 45 days, right? So
Yeah.
16 weeks, as you mentioned, like a slow progression. Like if you've seen how big a pound or those like models of 5 pounds of fat, like imagine if you only lost a pound of fat a week for 16 weeks, like that's 3 of those massive things off your body. So 16 weeks. And then, the rebound, for those who don't know, it's really a time when your body is like so depleted and just starved for nutrients that it's going to really just absorb much, much more than it ever would at any other time in your training. So it's a big reason why you see bodybuilders, if they do 3, 4, 5 shows, like you'll see them just massively bigger and put on a bunch of stage weight over that 5 years because they get 4 or 5 rebounds. And so there's tons of content on the channel about that process. But uh, if you could talk a little bit about like how long was that kind of rebound phase, and as you came out of it, like what was the strategy there?
Yeah. So we dieted down for about 16 weeks. And then entering the rebound phase, calories started going back up. And that probably lasted about 6 weeks. And I gained a substantial amount of weight during that time. I think I probably gained 20 plus pounds during the rebound. And, looking in the mirror, it looks like I only got leaner, because
Yeah.
your muscles fill back out with all the glycogen, all the water. At the end of a diet, you're a little bit deflated,
Right.
and you spend those 6 weeks just your body is like a sponge, just soaking up nutrients. You're training hard, you're feeling amazing in the gym, you've got your energy back, you're in a
Yeah.
calorie surplus, and quickly gained a ton of weight back, good weight. um, quickly gained a ton of strength back. And then, after those 6 weeks or so, then it's kind of going into the typical bodybuilder off season,
Right.
where we're not necessarily focused on a consolidated period of growth, but we're in a calorie surplus, eating a lot of food, training hard for several months. And as a strongman competitor, my year as a whole looks a little bit different than a bodybuilder. Like you mentioned, bodybuilder will do multiple shows throughout the year, multiple rebounds, multiple diets. As a strongman competitor, I don't quite have that luxury. I've got to have a longer quote unquote off season in
Right.
terms of bodybuilding dieting. I've got to get myself a little bit bigger than I probably would if I was a competitive bodybuilder. Um, and then obviously, that period of time is when I'm competing in strongman. Um, but ever since then, it's now been my philosophy that at least once a year, every year, I'm going to diet myself down like a bodybuilder. I'm going to
Yeah.
diet down and I'm going to rebound. And that's what I advocate for any competitor is whether you're a power lifter or you're a strongman, when you're done competing, when you're going into your off season, focus on your physique, like get lean. There are so many benefits that you'll reap, especially for the bigger guys, especially
Yeah.
for the super heavyweights. Um, Dieting down in your off season it is going to set you up for the best period of growth in your life. And that's when nutrition became hugely important for me. That's when things really took off for me, as a
Yeah.
lifter.
Well, and I think one of the things too that I'm sure this is the case with you is, the size of the person you're working with is going to determine these numbers, but generally, if it's anywhere from a 250 up to 750 to 1,000 calories more, you know, per week, maybe a little more than that in a guy your size. But I think it's important to work with someone in the off season or at least have check-ins periodically so that you don't kind of perma bulk or get to that, oh, I put on extra 5 or 6% body fat because I was ramping up. And I know we've all been there. I know I've been there to where I'm adding maybe too many calories too fast, where it's like, you start to kind of grow and you're like, this is great, more is better. And then there's a point where that scale tips, but you could wake up 6 months from now and be eating way more food than you did during your rebound and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm struggling to keep my weight up because you kind of grew. The saying is like growing into the diet, where I think a lot of people it's like you have to be patient, but being patient actually helps you get where you want to go faster, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people.
Yeah, and when you're dieting, when we're in the fat loss phase, it seems like there tends to be a little bit of a higher degree of focus on the nutrition. Number one, you're hungry, so you're thinking about every meal. And when I'm dieting, I'm like hyper focused on it. I'm always prepping. I'm always thinking about my next meal. I'm seeing the visual progress in the mirror. But to your point, you get into that off season mode, that same level of focus is hard to maintain.
Mhm.
Suddenly things have shifted. Now we're eating a lot of food. Now it's like, all right, it's time to gain weight. And it's very easy to get into that much more lackadaisical mindset. And then, the deeper you get into that off season, you're not as hungry anymore. And suddenly that bowl of rice doesn't look nearly as appetizing, as that bowl of cinnamon toast crunch.
Right.
And so to your point, for me, it's almost more important to work with a coach in an off-season phase when I'm growing, to keep me accountable, like you said, to make sure I'm A, eating enough, B, not eating too much, and then it's gonna keep me in the pocket in terms of what I'm eating.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point.